This is Caffeinated Risk, the monthly podcast for security professionals by security professionals, focused on the principles of enterprise security risk management, exploring technology and business management issues and how they relate to information security risk. Once a month, two self-proclaimed grumpy security guys bring you analysis, insights, and interviews with leading security risk professionals to learn how they work through a project, a program, or their careers using a risk-based approach to security. Now here are your hosts, Tim McCreet and Doug Leese.
It always comes back to business. I think that's what people miss about computers and security is, in our world, it's still about show me the money, show me the return on investment, show me the value.
Yep.
And no, it's not about MD5 sums and firewall rules. You had mentioned that just as we were coming on about an opening or a lack of expertise in what we would call cloud-specific security capabilities and how there are open positions that sometimes go for months.
Mm-hmm.
So in the back of my mind, as somebody who grew up in data centers and learned all of the on-prem stuff, I have my preconceptions, but what would you say are maybe the 2 or 3 or 4 kinds of things that an experienced security person from, let's call it the old ways, would need to understand is specific to cloud, or what those fundamental mind shifts are that they would have to embrace to really do cloud properly?
I mean, I think I was speaking with a CISO the other day who's on our CXO Trust Advisory Council, and he was talking, and he is a very seasoned fellow, but he was talking about this shift that's necessary because most organizations, when we did some research a couple of years ago, I should say last year, and then we have some new research we're releasing this year, they were using 3 or more public cloud providers. Certainly, most were hybrid.
Mm-hmm.
And they were worried about myriad things, with sort of like migrating workloads to the cloud. They were concerned about, stuff like transparency, cost, compliance weren't top of mind, but certainly integration was, scalability was. And then the whole notion of trying to wed the security requirements with the hybrid environment. So he talked about challenges where, especially when it comes to compliance mandates, because he's a critical infrastructure organization, he has to make sure that he has preventative measures in place along with detection and response controls, but he has to show parity across the environments. The other thing too is that this notion of somehow working with the hyperscalers, the folks who are providing these cloud services, to evaluate the risks that are posed to your cloud workloads, data, environments, that's a big challenge too that has come up quite often. So in one of the surveys we did last year, it showed that many respondents were still doing only annual sort of risk management. They were sort of looking at their metrics on an annual basis. There were some that were looking monthly.
Mm-hmm.
And, it was around 48%, I'm looking at the stats now, who were trying to move into more of a real-time consult of managing their risks. I mean, some of those things I think are pretty key. And then this idea of looking and working with these providers about automation for change management whenever they see problems, proactivity.
Mm-hmm.
And then another thing that's been coming up a lot is just understanding assets.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds basic, but it's not. It's this idea, it's actually more complicated because you're dealing with your on-prem environments, and then you're dealing with the cloud providers, and then you have partners because you're looking at all the various risks that are coming out, right? Supply chain, all this stuff. So I mean, it's much of the same, I guess, many of the top requirements, but it's the idea of how you tie all this stuff together, and then how you're working with these multi-cloud environments, because it's not necessarily true, or you're not seeing them necessarily being all that interoperable, if you understand me, with some of their practices.
Yeah. 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 Well, I
So
was going to
that
go by market,
also,
but sure, let's go by design.
yeah,
Right?
so that also introduces complexities as well and challenges. But I was talking to a woman, a CIO with a 3-letter agency maybe 6 months ago, and she was talking about how she and her team were very concerned because they were moving from one cloud provider to 3. She was waiting for this wave, this avalanche of information from all of the vendors, and she was just hungry for more, ecumenical information and guidance. And that's why our membership, I think, is increasing, and why we're seeing more and more chapters form and all that jazz. They want that vendor neutral guidance.
And it's very difficult to get vendor neutral guidance when so much of the cloud offering depends on the very specific features that vendor offers.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I kind of like the products that are coming out of the Cloud Security Alliance, because it's agnostic, right? Like, it's if you just did your job, and if you just focused on these elements, you're putting yourself in a better place from a security perspective.
Mm-hmm.
We are those grumpy security professionals. I can't use old anymore, but we're those grumpy security professionals who've been around for a while.
It's okay. It's good to be curmudgeonly at times.
Exactly. So I'm going to go back to my old rant, is that we always want to know what we're trying to protect, and can we wrap our arms around it? And it just sounds like in some cases now, with the complexity of these different environments, like if I'm splitting my work between different hypervisor organizations, how am I ever going to get a handle on what I'm supposed to protect, or what's my partner responsible for, or what do I need to worry about, and when are you going to react to something or respond to that incident? I think it becomes, there's even more training or more requirements for us as security professionals to figure this stuff out, because we're seeking that nirvana where it's cheaper, better, faster, infrastructure is less cost, someone else is going to manage this for us. Well, wait a second. We're still ultimately accountable for those assets in that environment. It's starting to scare me, because who's got the handle on this? Because we still can't even on-prem do a half-assed job of letting me know what I have to patch. Log4j proved that. Can you show me where they all are? Sure, we're good. 2 weeks later, 10,000 instances later, 140,000 instances later, we weren't really good at this stuff. And I don't know if we're going to get any better when we get to the cloud.
And I think too, some of the guidance we have, our cloud controls matrix, we certainly, it's very dense, and it shows all the areas that need to be a focus for those individuals who are really, progressing their cloud journeys, right? At the same time, I definitely have had conversations with some of our members who are desirous of seeing more details kind of underpinning some of those controls, specifically associated with all of the main, hyperscalers, those major cloud providers. And so I think there is a way we might be able to address some of those needs through our CXO Trust, and that's still evolving. So we did sort of this soft launch at the RSA conference virtually last year. And we've slowly now established an advisory council of, say, 40 members. That's reserved for organizations from our corporate members. And then we just launched our research working group that's associated with the CXO Trust. And that's open to anybody and everybody who wishes to be a part of it. And we'll be releasing our first research piece at the RSA conference during our CXO Trust Summit in person. And it'll be focused on zero trust strategies for the C-suite. But I think as part of that CXO Trust effort, based on some of the conversations I had to help with the launch and sort of prioritize some of the things we'd like to pursue as part of the roadmap, we talked about this notion of ensuring that we find ways to get specific needs from the enterprises that these cloud providers serve, have them talk about, the pros and cons of some of the features. And we'd have to, I think the way we do this is following the cloud controls matrix. It makes sense. Or maybe, the consensus assessment initiative questionnaire that's
Right,
also associated
right.
with that.
Yeah.
But if we compartmentalize the topics from that, and then we kind of did like a little survey with some of these CXOs, pros, cons, good, bad, could you fix this, and bring them together with the vendors, I think it would do just such good for both parties. And so that was one of the main pillars sort of underpinning the CXO Trust, opening up that line of communication and really making sure that the products, the services are progressing the way that organizations need them to. And if there's an argument for them to go a different route, then let's talk about it. Let's make sure that we're addressing the needs and we're seeing what else we can do.
Right.
That's encouraging that we're bringing in the folks that are paying, 6-figure monthly bills and stuff. They're the ones that are going to move the main features. Me and my little, $50 to $100 a month cloud purchase amongst about 8 different providers. I am not the one that's going to rock that boat.
But getting that, giving any level of consumer sort of a voice, I think is important. And we do have the small players, the SMBs, but we do have the large enterprises. And we've heard, sometimes there are challenges with the communication between the large enterprises and their providers. So if we can, play a hand in that. We also try to, for example, the SEC right now, they're in the process of, I'm pretty sure it's open for comment actually, implementing some requirements for identity, incident response, and incident reporting.
Yep.
And they're also, they have some pretty interesting requirements as far as expertise on the teams that will be, they're looking to see occur for public companies.
Wow.
But stuff like that, we want to be a voice for our members and the wider community. So we were just talking to a couple of our members and then some of our contributors to the research working group about starting to amass comments. So a CSA on the parts of all of these individuals can submit those to the SEC and make sure that, again, people's voices are heard. We try to play that role quite consistently.
When you first learn cloud, they talk about the shared responsibility and the cross boundary thing. But Tim, I think, touched on something kind of interesting there where he said, we're still on the hook. So from a risk management perspective, if it's a shared accountability, how is that risk shared? Have we been exploring that at all? From what I'd understood, most of the cloud providers' accountability is just to make sure it's on and working as described. But if we're looking at what's going on with Okta right now, because that was this morning.
Yep.
Okta probably doesn't own a lot of the servers where those things have taken place. So do they blame whoever their provider is, or is it the app that's sitting on top of the provider? And what do I care? I'm the customer who's giving the money to Okta to authenticate my users, and now I'm not sure if I can trust that or not. So it gets pretty hairy, like you say. How do we identify those accountabilities going forward? Maybe even to the point of going to court over certain things like that. Like there doesn't seem to be a lot of rules yet, which I think makes people nervous.
I mean, we definitely have heard from some of our members about wanting to, so hearkening back to this notion of establishing sort of a library or repository of guidance and frameworks. And a lot of the frameworks, by the way, we're talking about are available to the public.
Yep.
You don't have to be a member at all. So the CCM, the cake, all that kind of stuff, you can just download it from our site. I think, as we move forward with some of these initiatives like the CXO Trust, we just announced the Zero Advancement Center, a Zero Trust Advancement Center maybe a week ago, we'll start kind of delineating more some of the content that members might share with one another and keep that, exclusive to them and still have offerings for the wider public. But going back to the question, one of the things that we certainly have been hearing from very large members too is, well, as we're looking at the larger providers and as we're looking at some of these SaaS providers, what's a typical SLA, service level agreement? What should I have in here? And then we are having some questions about, since some of the supply chain attacks that we've seen, how are we, making sure that our partners are adhering to what we would expect should be some of the security controls that they should have in place when dealing with their data. And honestly, I think it comes down to, going back to understanding your assets and your environment, but then also working really closely with trusted partners, and, making sure that when you're paying for the service, they have to be accountable for certain things. Ultimately, though, you can't hand your responsibility for the protecting the data to the vendor. Whatever workloads you're uploading into those environments, you're still going to have some accountability. And I think how that's more clearly identified would probably be articulated in those agreements. And I also think too that even though you wouldn't expect this in this day and age, I do think when you're dealing with the strong partnerships, people want to do the right thing. They don't want to leave their customers and their buddies out in the lurch. They're going to do what they need to do. And I just saw an email come up about Okta. I need to actually get up to speed on where that's at now.
I'll wait an hour. It'll say something new.
Yeah, wait an hour.
That seems to be the big complaint right now, as the story keeps changing. But it's a good, it's great that we're talking about these kinds of things, but without those clear lines of accountability, I still see a disconnect, because I'm also thinking the money. There's a definite pressure to keep driving that cost down. So from the hyperscalers' perspective, they've got these throngs of customers saying, I want more, I want more, I want more, but I want to pay less and less and less because the bill is getting high. Do we maybe look at trying to split the SLA or the risk acceptance along more practical lines? Like if it's an availability impact, it clearly lives with this kind, versus the fact that you lost your data because you put on password 123 is not a Microsoft problem.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
I think we can all agree on that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Almost having that laid out so that, case law or whatever, civil law can kind of get their arms around that quickly to say, you pay in the appropriate amounts.
Really, I think the pandemic proved this. Even those larger organizations, and to be honest with you, as I've come on to CSA in this role, and I'm still learning and meeting some of the members, I will tell you that I'm surprised at some of the larger organizations that haven't fully embraced some of the cloud services, and how it happened that they started to accelerate their journeys because of COVID, right? So you had myriad workers at home. They needed access. They needed to collaborate. So they needed to figure out how they could enable this, the organizations, and they did it very quickly in some instances. But the other benefit from the study, one of the studies we did, was that they could trust, because they're one of many tenants, thousands, hundreds of thousands, whatever it may be. The uptime thing was a huge benefit, right? Business continuity was a huge thing. They, in the SLAs, they have to cite certain obligations. The provider is responsible for making sure that if something happens, you better get us up and running because time is money, right?
Yeah.
So those sorts of things, I think, can be very clearly delineated, defined in the agreements.
Do you think, Illena, that during the pandemic, that's when some of the behavior attitudes toward the cloud changed? Because I remember many years ago using the CSA, the framework to really structure an entire program about cloud for an organization I was working at. We were just entering into it and we needed something. And I think we literally borrowed everything out of the Cloud Security Alliance, and that became the structure for the cloud agreements. But do you think that now, after we've been functionally working at home for 2 years and safely in most cases, that we've adopted a lot of different approaches and created that availability for the information in the systems, have we taken away maybe some of that stigma that first was there maybe a decade ago? And that the pandemic proved that this is an actual viable functional alternative for organizations to really develop and focus and grow? Because here's the benefits. All of us are sitting here doing this podcast from our homes through a cloud provider.
To me, that was one of the very rare benefits that we experienced.
Other than my dog sitting here sleeping, I'm good, right? So yeah.
I've been hanging out with my puppies too,
there
but
you go. Yeah.
I would like to shake somebody's hand. But yeah, that was one of the rare benefits for sure. That was proven through COVID for sure. And I think that has even I see examples of some of our members who were resistant, and then they might. So one of the benefits we have for our corporate members is, I mentioned this very briefly earlier, they can come to us about specific problems, and we can find them analysts to meet with them and give them guidance, and maybe show them some templates or whatever it may be. We have some great expertise both on the team and then contracted. And then some of our other members will even provide some examples too. But so it's all about that information sharing. But even through those analyst briefings, we've seen some companies that, were a little bit slow. They were kind of skeptical, traditional sort of brick and mortar companies. And even in the year, only the year I've been here, when we met with them again, they'll have 10 people on the call, and they're talking about, okay, so we've done this, and this. We've got this done. We need help with. They've just made crazy inroads, and they definitely have talked about the benefits, and we're seeing that time and time again in the research we're doing. I would imagine that when we're pursuing some of these annual reports, we're going to end up seeing more and more organizations migrating more workloads to the cloud. There are a lot of startups that are working with us. Mm-hmm. They're all about cloud first. Right. At our CXO Trust Summit, we have a CISO with a longstanding traditional company who's going to talk about adopting cloud first and how it's just improved everything for that organization. So I definitely think we're away from this. Should we do it? Can we trust it? To we got to do it. Actually, and then there are some, anecdotally, speaking to a friend of mine in EMEA, he said he was consulting with one of their government agencies, and one fellow said, we're never going to do that, and this is kind of pre-COVID, but before everything shut down, we're never going to do that. And another guy said, but actually, we're using Azure. So...
Surprise.
And so there's also, obviously, it's kind of like that curve, right? There always will be those people or those companies, people in the companies who have to be educated and brought up to speed, on even the basics, like what is cloud? It is crazy how things have evolved. I think for conceptually, when it comes to taking like that risk management approach, it seems that we're moving to that zero trust sort of philosophy or model. And for those of us who have been around for a while, it's not new. No. You had the Jericho Forum talking about deperimeterization how many years ago, right? So it's sort of the same concept.
Yeah, 2008. Yeah, that's a while ago. Yeah.
So now we're doing the zero trust thing, and we're making sure we're also going to develop some training associated with that, and the advancement center is going to provide some guidance. We've got that research coming out at RSA, but that does seem to be sort of critically important too now for organizations to understand when they're trying to secure as best they can, and then respond to incidents in these hybrid environments. That seems to be the model.
And I think that's so cool. That's exactly what I wanted to bug you about that. And I'm so happy you brought it up, because you're right. We've seen this happen for decades now as it's unrolled. And I wanted to ask your perspective when you were at the magazine, and now that you're here. We've been talking about risk and risk in cyber, and getting the business to accept it. Do you think it's getting closer to a business actually understanding that risk a little better? Now that we're looking at more cloud providers, and they see things maybe from a contractual perspective, does that put risk in a different light now? Where before, when everything was on premise and we had in our data centers, I worried about that within the data center, things I could wrap my arms around. But is it making it? I'm hoping, fingers crossed, that it's making it easier for businesses to look at this now from that contract or that agreement perspective, to understand, to Doug's earlier point, you need to be worried about this risk, and we're going to look after this risk. Is like, are we going to get to those discussions eventually, or maybe we're already there? I'm not sure, but everything you've seen from the magazine, working your way to your career now, have you seen that change over time?
Yeah, I mean, I think so, and I think it's interesting, that evolution when it comes to the role of cybersecurity, because when I first started in the space, we were still owned by these two dudes from Wales, SC Media, right? And then we sort of transferred. We went through that first acquisition to Haymarket Media, and we established these offices all over the globe, with the exception, I think, of Latin America. And at the time, there weren't really any formal CISO roles. I wasn't talking to CISOs when I first started at all. I was talking to, the CIO, the CTO, maybe some folks who are much more in the weeds to write these stories. And then I think it was, I don't know, within 2 years of me being with the publication, I heard about Steve Katz at Citigroup, and he had this new title, and I think at the time it was Chief Security Officer, if I'm not mistaken, not Chief Information Security Officer. And so he and I talked, and he started talking about how he was creating this cybersecurity division. And at that time, by the way, it wasn't called cybersecurity. Yep. It was called information security, or InfoSec. There's still some diehard folks who hate cyber. Yep. But I think that ship has sailed. I'm sorry, people, but
let it go. Right? So let it go.
But yeah, and so he was really talking about how he was, at the time, I recall very, very clearly, that he probably on his team only had 3 people specifically dedicated to information security at Citigroup, I believe it was. And at that time, a lot of the financial organizations, the government entities, were much more advanced than other vertical markets. There were no compliance mandates really in place. Might be a directive here to, 1 or 2 from some, like the SEC or something. And he talked about how he was absolutely, working and interacting with the IT teams, the networking guys, the developers, to make sure that they were baking in security and trying to, get that to come along. I think as we saw that sort of space continue to evolve, it became more and more clear that there needed to be some sort of dedicated leadership role. But it took some time to see the CISO get some play. And some of my presentations, even, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, I would reference this cartoon that showed the CISO sitting at the kiddie table during, let's say a Thanksgiving. Yep. And one of the fellows from the big table, the boardroom table, saying, "Come on, it's time for you to move over here."
Yep.
And that was only recent. And I do believe that the pandemic also has had some play in helping to illustrate for some organizations, executives, how important cybersecurity is. They've had to have a seat at the table because if they were accelerating their journeys to the cloud, they needed to make sure that they were implementing the right security controls. And now you're starting to see stuff like the business security officer come on board, or the business information officer, and they're playing a role in cybersecurity. So it's definitely continuing to evolve. And I think the mindset for many organizations has changed. Interestingly, in the SEC, and I haven't read the 200 and something pages yet. I was just reading a summary from Oric, but they do talk about board responsibility and some of these new regulations that they're reviewing and looking to codify. So I do think more and more and more people are understanding, or organizations are understanding, the executive leadership are understanding that they share the burden. They need to make sure, they need to step up, they need to make the investment, and have the resources available for cybersecurity.
Illena, it's been great to chat with you from where you started your career and where you are today. And we're looking forward to where you're going to take CSA in the future. So this has just been awesome. So thanks for spending time with us.
No, thank you kindly. Thank you both for having me. It's been a great pleasure. And I'm so glad that we were able to reconnect, Tim. This is great.
All right. Thanks again.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, Doug. Thank you, Tim.
That's awesome.
Okay,
Take care.
Thanks for listening to the latest podcast from Caffeinated Risk. Make sure you visit our website, caffeinatedrisk.com, to stay up to date on what we've been working on. Our website has bios of our podcast guests, posts about topics we're passionate about, and even a library of reference material we find valuable in the work we do every day. And don't forget to subscribe to Caffeinated Risk on your favorite podcast service. This way, you'll be notified when we release our next podcast, and you can listen to our previous guests just in case you missed them. Thanks so much for listening to Caffeinated Risk.